And with this, I give the floor back to Mr. Lowcock to read the briefing again. Mr. Lowcock, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. I'm told you heard part of what I said, but do you want me to start from the beginning or pick up from where I'm told you lost the sound?
I would kindly ask you to read from the beginning. There were several technical glitches during your statement. Thank you.
Very good. I'm happy to do that. So thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to start by saying that several weeks after I started this job in October 27, I went to Yemen again because I wanted to see for myself what was going on there and what the world might do to help. And when I came back, I described, including here in the Security Council, what I saw: bombed out buildings, children starving to death, families crowded into tents, surging disease, and a collapsing economy. And the only way to stop all that suffering, I said, was to end the war. In the meantime, I noted, the world could also do other things that would help right away. Better protection for civilians, more access for aid workers, more money for aid agencies, and more support for the Yemeni economy. Those 5 points will sound familiar. Nearly 4 years later, they're still the things we ask for every month. But I believed then, as I do now, that by acting on all 5 of those issues, the world can make a difference. And over the years, we have seen some important achievements. In 2018-19, for example, we stopped a major famine. There are some early signs that perhaps we'll manage to stop a big famine again this year as well, although I should emphasize that it's still too early to be sure, and a lot depends on what happens in the next 3 months. But 2 brushes with mass famine in 3 years is not a success. Even if the worst was avoided, it's a failure. Millions of Yemenis can attest to that. Their lives have just kept getting worse. There's broad agreement on what to do, including in the Security Council, and we need to translate that agreement into action. And that means everyone, especially the parties to the conflict, must act on all 5 of those points that we've been discussing here for years. Let's start with the protection of civilians. On average, at least 5 civilians are now being killed or injured by hostilities in Yemen every single day. May was the deadliest month so far this year, with more than 60 civilians killed across the country. On 10 June, a missile and drone attack, apparently launched by Ansar Allah forces, struck Marib city, causing dozens of civilian casualties. The explosions also damaged a nearby residence for aid workers. The Ansar Allah offensive in Marib continues to pose a direct threat to millions of people, including more than 1 million Yemenis who fled their homes and are sheltering in and around the city. Airstrikes, shelling, clashes, and other incidents have continued in other parts of Yemen over the last month as well, causing civilian casualties in Sadr, Taiz, Hudaydah, and elsewhere. At all times, the parties must take constant care to spare civilians and civilian objects throughout military operations. There must be, as well, accountability for serious violations. And as I've been saying since 2017, Yemen needs a nationwide ceasefire, as Martin referred to in his statement. I would also like to draw attention once again to the plight of migrants and refugees, because yesterday a boat carrying more than 150 migrants sank off Yemen's southern coast. Local reports indicate 25 bodies have already washed up on shore. Dozens of people are still missing. Migrants and refugees in Yemen face some of the most dangerous conditions in the world, and they need more support. Mr. President, the next point is access for aid workers. Aid agencies are now helping more than 10 million people every month in Yemen, but they still face too many obstacles. Most, but not all of the problems are in areas controlled by Ansar Allah. Senior donor and agency officials discussed all this in an important meeting on 1 June. They welcome progress over the last year on issues like assessments, project approvals, and biometrics. But they were also clear that much more is needed, particularly to facilitate future assessments, allow aid workers to travel without undue restrictions, and agree standard operating procedures to fast-track project approvals, visas, and other routine processes. Where humanitarian agencies can't do what they're supposed to do, we can expect funding to decline and aid to reduce. The parties, especially Ansar Allah, need to do more to facilitate their work. That will help convince donors to sustain funding through the year. And my next point, Mr. President, is funding for the humanitarian operation. Since the pledging event on 1 March, the response plan has moved from about 15% funded to 43% funded today. That's substantial progress. And I want to thank the United States, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Germany, the European Union, and those others who've stepped up. The wider aid operation is, as of today, on a better financial footing. Starting this month, the World Food Programme is resuming full rations for 6 million hungry people whose aid had previously been cut. But, Mr. President, the money will soon start running out again. In August, UNICEF will cut fuel support for water and sanitation systems serving 3.4 million people. In September, the World Health Organization will stop providing the minimum service package that enables healthcare for 6 million people. And the cuts will intensify from there. The dangers of famine, disease, including COVID, and displacement have not gone away. And if more money doesn't come in, more people will die. So I once more call on all donors to pay outstanding pledges right away. More than $200 million in promises from the March event have still not been paid, including from some of Yemen's biggest donors. I'm also calling on donors to increase their support and ensure funds are distributed in a balanced way across all the sectors where we need activities to be financed. In September, Sweden and Switzerland will co-host a humanitarian event on Yemen in the margins of the General Assembly. And that's a meeting intended to follow up on the pledging conference of 1 March. And it's really important that donors use the opportunity to increase their support and announce it that day. Mr. President, my next point is Yemen's economy, which has collapsed as a result of the conflict. And it's that economic collapse that's driving many of the most severe needs, including the risk of famine. As I have often said before, the two fastest ways to help the economy are to free up commercial imports and to bolster the exchange rate. For years, the Security Council has agreed that commercial imports must be to enter all ports in adequate quantities, but that's still not happening. Fuel imports into Hodeidah from January to May were 1/5 the level, 20% of the equivalent period last year. And as a result, fuel prices are going up. And that's making food, water, and everything else more expensive too, as well as forcing cuts in essential services. Increased fuel imports through Aden have not offset these price increases. Now, the government recently authorized 4 fuel vessels to enter Hodeidah. All of them had previously been cleared by the UN verification and inspection mechanism. One of them had been waiting more than 6 months for government permission to proceed. This cycle of shortages and partial relief, the stranglehold being enforced and then gradually released, has been going on for a year due to a dispute over revenue. And the parties really have to find a solution to that dispute. Martin has offered the countless ideas to do that. They need to be taken up. Lifting restrictions on commercial imports, as well as refraining from interference in the domestic market, would help millions of people. And then the second thing is strengthening the exchange rate, because that also is a key determinant of what people can afford. The real is now trading at around 940 to the US dollar in government-held areas. That is a record low. And in May, food basket prices exceeded 55,000 real, a record high. And those two things are linked. The more the exchange rate collapses, the more expensive food becomes. And so what's needed is what's worked previously, foreign exchange into the banking system to stabilize the real and bring down prices. And I really hope that Yemen's partners will work closely with the government now to achieve that. Lastly, Mr. President, the question of progress towards peace, I strongly support everything Martin's just told you. There have been no shortage of opportunities to stop the war, but the parties have failed to take those opportunities. As I said at the beginning, I've been calling for a nationwide ceasefire since late 2017. It would give Yemenis a break from the violence. It would create more space for political engagement. There shouldn't be any preconditions. War has solved nothing. Try something different. Give peace a chance. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Lowcock for his briefing.